Since 19th September 1944, the morning sky over Belgium was gray, heavy with clouds and the quiet promise of a storm. Soldiers of the 2nd American Infantry Division sat in cold trenches, staring at the empty fields ahead, nervous and tired. The Germans had been relentless. Each day brought artillery shells, machine gun fire, and loss. But something was about to change, something the enemy wouldn't see coming. Back in a secret military lab months earlier, American scientists had been working on a technology that sounded like something out of science fiction. A fuse that could sense its target and explode at just the right moment. It was called the radar proximity fuse. Unlike traditional shells that exploded only on impact or after a timer ran out, this fuse could detect when it was near something, like an enemy plane or tank, and detonate in mid-air, right above or beside the target. The idea was simple but powerful. Don't just hope your shell hits the target. Make sure it explodes close enough to do real damage, every time. The British first used it in anti-aircraft guns during air raids, especially against the deadly German V-1 rockets. But when America began to use it in the European battlefield, especially in field artillery, its power became clear. And on this particular morning in September 1944, the 2nd Infantry would see it in action for the first time. German forces had been gathering for a counterattack, lining up tanks and infantry just beyond the hills. American spotters had seen them. The order was given. Artillery units prepared to fire, but this time the shells they loaded were different, equipped with the new proximity fuses. No one on the ground, not even most of the soldiers, knew what was inside them. All they knew was they were told to watch the sky. The first shells screamed through the air. They didn't hit the ground. Instead, they exploded mid-air, right over the heads of the advancing German troops. The result was devastating. Shrapnel tore through soldiers who thought they were safe in shallow ditches. Tanks had their vision ports smashed, crews injured. The Germans panicked. They had never seen anything like it. They were used to shells hitting the ground or flying past. But now death was falling from above, and it was too accurate, too sudden. A young American private named Tom Miller later wrote in his letter home, "We thought they had sent angels from the sky. The explosions never touched the ground, but they fell over the heads of those Nazi bastards like God's own fury." For the American military, the radar proximity fuse became a turning point. It didn't just help in direct attacks, it saved lives. Anti-aircraft guns became far more effective. Where before it took hundreds of shells to shoot down a fast-moving plane, now it took a few. In the Pacific, it helped defend ships from kamikaze attacks. In Europe, it made artillery far deadlier and smarter. But most of all, it stayed a secret for a long time. Soldiers didn't even know what was different about their ammo. If a shell was captured and examined by the enemy, it was programmed to self-destruct. That's how valuable it was. Even Hitler's top scientists had no clue what made American artillery so precise all of a sudden. The enemy thought Americans had found some magical accuracy. The truth was, they had found science. By the end of the war, many generals, including General George Patton himself, credited the proximity fuse as one of the main reasons the Allies won. Some even said it was as important as radar, as the atomic bomb, or as the breaking of the German Enigma code. But to the soldiers on the field, it was simpler. It was the thing that made their enemies fall before they ever reached the trench. It was the quiet guardian above their heads. And on that stormy September day in 1944, it turned what could have been a deadly loss into a powerful victory. The battlefield after the attack looked like something from a nightmare. Smoke hovered low over the field. Craters pockmarked the earth, and twisted metal from German vehicles lay in blackened heaps. What was strange, even eerie, was how little damage there was to the ground itself. The shells hadn't exploded on contact. Instead, they had burst mid-air, spraying razor-sharp shrapnel downwards like invisible rain. The dead lay still in open trenches, their helmets knocked off, faces frozen in shock. The German soldiers who survived that morning attack ran in terror. Some dropped their rifles, others screamed into radios that the Americans have a new kind of bomb. Fear spread through their lines faster than orders could catch it. Inside an American command tent, not far behind the front, Colonel Briggs lit a cigarette with shaky fingers. He wasn't a man easily surprised. 2 years in this war had hardened him, but what he'd just witnessed had left even him stunned. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, looking at the radio operator. "Did you see how clean that strike was? That wasn't luck." The operator just nodded, eyes wide. By now, whispers about the new fuse were moving through American lines. Soldiers weren't supposed to talk about it, but they did. In hushed voices, behind ammo crates and over late-night coffee, they called it Skyfire, or the Ghost Bomb. Some thought it was guided by remote control. Others believed it used secret magnets. A few joked that it was built with alien technology, but none of them truly understood it. And that was the beauty of it. What made the radar proximity fuse so deadly was that it didn't rely on guesswork. Each shell carried a tiny radar transmitter. As it flew through the air, it sent out radio waves. When those waves bounced off something, a plane wing, a tank roof, a group of men, the shell would sense the nearness and explode instantly. It didn't need to hit the target. It only needed to get close. And in war, close was enough. In the German command bunkers, panic was growing. Reports were coming in from all over the Western Front. Troops in France, Belgium, and Holland were experiencing sudden, unusually effective American artillery. Some began to believe the Americans had developed a shell that could see. Others suspected the Allies had found a way to jam German defenses. No one guessed the truth, that the power of radar had been packed into a steel shell and fired like any other round. Back at the American front, Private Tom Miller and his squad were preparing for another push. The orders were clear: advance, while the Germans were still shaken. But Tom couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen earlier. "That shell didn't even land," he whispered to his buddy Jackson as they moved forward. "It just hung in the air, then boom, right above their heads," Jackson grinned. "Maybe we're finally fighting smart, huh? Not just hard." Tom wasn't sure if it was smart or just terrifying. He had seen plenty of horrors in this war, but never anything so surgical, so cold. There was something unnatural about killing men before they even reached your position, before they knew they were in range. By nightfall, the Americans had captured 2 German artillery positions, dozens of rifles, and 5 tanks, all without losing a single man. For a moment, the soldiers allowed themselves to feel something rare in war: confidence. But back in Washington, D.C., the men who invented the fuse weren't celebrating. Dr. Carl Anderson, one of the lead physicists on the proximity fuse project, sat alone in his lab, reading field reports. His hands were shaking, not from pride, but from guilt. He had seen the power of his creation. He knew what it meant for the enemy. But he also knew what it meant for the future. "We've made death smarter," he whispered, staring into the lamp on his desk. "What happens when it outsmarts us?" The war was still raging, but something had changed. A new kind of weapon had entered the game. Not just more powerful, but more intelligent, more invisible, more terrifying. And though it remained a secret for now, the world would soon learn what it meant when science met warfare with no mercy. The days after the battle saw a strange shift in the rhythm of war. For once, American soldiers weren't just reacting. They were dictating the pace. Wherever the proximity-fused shells were used, the results were the same. German units were torn apart before they could organize, convoys were decimated from above, and low-flying enemy aircraft were blasted out of the sky before they even reached their bombing runs. Tom Miller's unit pushed forward faster than they ever had before. Villages once held by the Nazis fell like dominoes. One town surrendered before a single bullet was fired, simply because the locals had heard about the invisible explosions that followed the Americans. Soldiers were starting to believe that they were unstoppable. They weren't entirely wrong, but they also didn't understand the danger of that belief. Late one evening, as Tom sat beside a small fire with Jackson and the rest of the squad, the sky above was quiet for once. No gunfire, no shells, just stars. You know what scares me the most? Tom said, poking at the fire with a stick. Jackson looked up from his mess tin. What? That I'm getting used to it. To the sound of those explosions. To the smell after. To watching people just fall. No warning. No noise before. Just boom. And they're gone. Jackson sighed and tossed a pebble into the flames. That's war, man. Tom shook his head. No, it's different now. It's too clean. Too fast. I used to look a man in the eye before I fired. Now I don't even see them. Just smoke and screams in the distance. It's like we're becoming ghosts. Before Jackson could respond, an officer appeared from the shadows. Lieutenant Graves, sharp uniform, always calm, always cold. He was carrying a metal box, locked tight, with a clipboard on top. Pack up, he said, without a smile. New orders. High Command wants us to escort this. He held up the box. Straight to Bastogne. Priority transport. You leave at first light. Tom glanced at the box. It was heavier than it looked. He didn't need to ask what was inside. He already knew. More proximity fuses. Maybe the next generation. Maybe something even worse. On the road to Bastogne, the squad traveled light. The truck was armored, but the escort was minimal. 2 jeeps, no tanks. It felt strange carrying something so important with so little protection. That's when they were hit. The explosion came from underneath the lead jeep. A mine, expertly placed. Flames roared into the air. The truck skidded to a stop as bullets tore through the night. It was an ambush. German soldiers, hidden in the trees, opened fire. They weren't regular troops. These were SS commandos, sent not to win a battle but to steal. The Americans returned fire, but it was chaos. One by one, soldiers fell. Tom dragged the box from the back of the truck, heart pounding. He saw the enemy coming closer, faces painted, guns raised. They knew what they were after. They weren't there to kill. They were there to capture the secret. Don't let them take it. Lieutenant Graves shouted, blood pouring from his shoulder. Destroy it if you have to. But there was no time. One German soldier lunged at Tom, tackling him to the ground. The box flew from his hands and skidded across the dirt. Tom scrambled to his feet, grabbed the nearest rifle, and fired. The German collapsed. Then he saw something terrifying. Another soldier, already reaching into the box, pulling out a shell with the fuse exposed. If the Germans got their hands on it, the war would change overnight. Tom didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the box, pulled the pin on a grenade, and threw it directly into the crate. The explosion was massive. Fire and dirt shot 20 feet into the air. The blast knocked Tom backward, slamming him into a tree. His ears rang. His arms burned. But when he opened his eyes, the box was gone. And so were the men trying to steal it. Later, when medics arrived and began treating the wounded, Lieutenant Graves limped over to Tom and crouched beside him. You saved it, he said quietly, or destroyed it. Either way, you did your job. Tom didn't respond. He was staring at his own hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just protected. Or maybe from what he'd helped unleash. The enemy now knew the Americans had something powerful, something terrifying, and they would stop at nothing to get it. The next morning, the sun rose slow and angry, bleeding orange across the blackened forest where the ambush had taken place. Smoke still drifted from the wreckage. The dead, both American and German, lay scattered like broken pieces of a forgotten game. But what haunted Tom most wasn't the bodies. It was the empty shell casing he found just a few feet from the blast. One of the German commandos had managed to pull a proximity fuse out before the grenade went off, and it was missing. Tom held the casing in his shaking hands, his mind racing. If they'd managed to escape with even one, even damaged, it would be enough. Enough to reverse engineer the tech. Enough to turn it against them. The fuse wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a ticking clock. At the field base near Bastogne, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers spoke in hushed voices. Military couriers rushed in and out of the command tents with sealed messages. General Hanley himself, a cold, hawk-eyed man rarely seen outside top-level briefings, had flown in by helicopter. Tom, his face bandaged and ribs cracked, sat on a bench outside the infirmary when the general approached him. "You're the one who blew the crate," Hanley said flatly. Tom nodded. There was no choice. They were seconds away from taking it. General Hanley gave a slow, almost reluctant nod of approval. "You did what most wouldn't have the guts to do. But I need to know. Are you sure none of it survived?" Tom hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the empty casing. Hanley's jaw clenched. "That's enough," he said grimly. "They've got a piece." Within hours, a full intelligence unit was mobilized. Planes were scrambled. Radio lines burned with encrypted chatter. A secret team known only as Echo Black was pulled from deep cover. Their mission: locate the stolen proximity tech before the Nazis could figure it out. But the Nazis weren't wasting time. Inside a bunker near Munich, deep underground, the fragment of the American fuse had already arrived. A captured German engineer, formerly an expert in early radar, examined it with shaking fingers. He didn't understand it all, but he understood enough. "Assist active," he whispered to the colonel beside him. "This changes everything." Hitler's scientists had tried and failed to make similar tech, but they didn't have the resources or the right minds. But now they had the blueprint, even a partial one, and orders to replicate it at any cost. Meanwhile, on the American side, Tom and his squad were reassigned to what they were told was a recovery detail. But that was a lie. They were being used as bait. General Hanley knew the Germans had a piece of the fuse, but not how to use it yet. They'd need more. They'd come hunting again. For supplies, for more shells, for any clue they could get. The plan was simple. Move a convoy carrying dummy crates, wooden boxes that looked exactly like proximity shells but were filled with scrap, through enemy-adjacent territory. And wait. Tom wasn't told the full plan. But he wasn't stupid. He saw how the officers looked at him now. Not like a soldier, but like a tool. "Like bait? You think they'll come again?" he asked Jackson as they rode in the back of the truck, disguised as a regular transport. Jackson shrugged. "They know what we've got." "Hell yeah, they'll come. The only question is, how soon?" They didn't have to wait long. That night, just outside a ruined village near the Ardennes, shadows moved in the tree line, silhouettes in black uniforms. No gunfire this time. No chaos, just silence. And then the truck's tires exploded. Not from mines, but from surgical precision shots. The convoy stopped. Soldiers readied their weapons. But something felt different. These weren't regular Nazis. They moved too smoothly. Their coordination too clean. Tom saw one glance at the crate and signal another in rapid hand signs. They were trained for this. Tom raised his rifle, but just before he fired, something behind the trees beeped. A low, rhythmic pulse. Familiar. His blood ran cold. "They're testing the fuse," he breathed. And then, for the first time in the war, Tom Miller felt a fear deeper than death. The enemy was learning. Tom didn't hesitate. "Fall back. Get away from the crates." he shouted, voice cracking from fear more than command. But the warning came a second too late. From the trees, that soft, pulsing beep suddenly spiked in frequency. And then came the unmistakable gut-punching sound of a mid-air explosion. Not a regular blast, not an impact. It was theirs, but fired by the enemy. Shrapnel tore through the night like a storm of razors. A U.S. soldier to Tom's left dropped without a scream, his helmet rolling into the mud. The truck behind them burst into flames, its fake cargo igniting in a flash. Men scattered. Bullets followed. But now it wasn't just rifles. It was precision fire, laced with that terrifying new sound. The enemy's first attempt at a proximity-fused detonation. Tom crawled behind a ditch, lungs burning, heart racing like a trapped animal. "They have it," he whispered to himself, shaking. "They really have it." Jackson dove in beside him, blood streaking down his arm. "That wasn't ours," he panted. "No one said we were firing." "I know," Tom said, gripping his rifle tighter. "Which means this war just changed." The ambush turned brutal fast. American troops fired blindly into the trees, unsure of where the real threat was. But the German strike team didn't need to hold ground. They had already proven their point. They could now strike like Americans. They vanished into the woods, slipping away before reinforcements could arrive. By dawn, the cost was clear. 3 trucks destroyed, 12 men dead, 5 wounded, and, more importantly, the top brass now knew the proximity fuse was no longer America's secret. Back at command, General Hanley paced in a fury. His eyes were red, his coffee untouched. The room filled with shouting officers, maps, field reports, and growing panic. "They don't just have the tech," Hanley growled, slamming a fist on the table. "They've weaponized it. That's a copycat shell. Crude, yes, but it worked. You all heard the report." He looked at a silent figure in the corner. A man in a dark suit, not military, with no name badge. "Operation Starfall begins now," Hanley said coldly. "Tell Echo Black they have clearance to cross lines. I want the lab, the scientists, every file. Burn to hell if we can't retrieve it. No trace, understood?" The man in the suit nodded once and walked out. No words. Back on the field, Tom sat in the infirmary again, his ribs now tightly wrapped and his arm in a sling. He stared out the canvas flap at the gray morning beyond. Everything had changed. No more secret weapon, no more upper hand, and no more clean victories. Later that day, Hanley himself walked into the tent. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes looked older. "You've got a talent for surviving hell," he said to Tom, pulling up a stool. Tom didn't answer. Hanley exhaled slowly. "I won't lie to you. It's bad. We estimate they've built at least a dozen working prototypes. Their range is shorter, less accurate, but with time, they'll improve. And when they do—" He trailed off. Tom looked at him. "So what now? We just hope they don't figure it out before the war ends?" "No," Hanley said darkly. "We end it before they can finish what we started." And with that, he handed Tom a sealed envelope. Inside was a transfer order. Not just to another front, to a deep black mission, a team assembled to go behind enemy lines, track the source of the Nazi fuse program, and destroy it completely. Tom stared at the paper. It wasn't just about saving soldiers anymore. It was about saving the world from a new kind of war, one that no one would be able to stop once it truly began. And somewhere deep in the heart of Nazi Germany, their version of the fuse was getting deadlier by the day. The train that carried Tom into the heart of the storm was unlike any he had ever ridden. No markings, no windows, no soldiers singing songs, just silence, steel, and shadows. There were only 6 people on board, all handpicked for Operation Starfall, the top-secret mission to infiltrate Nazi territory and destroy their proximity fuse program before it could turn the war on its head. Tom sat across from a woman with piercing green eyes and a face that didn't blink. Her name was Agent Eva Klein, a former German who had defected to the OSS after her family was executed by the SS for hiding Jews. She spoke 5 languages, could pick a lock in under 10 seconds, and carried a dagger strapped to her thigh like it was part of her skin. To Tom's right was Sergeant Marco Rivas, a demolitions expert from Brooklyn with shaky hands and a laugh that made even officers nervous. He once blew up an entire Nazi bridge network by mistake, and command decided that was exactly the kind of chaos they needed now. The other 3 were shadows: a sniper, a codebreaker, and a cold-eyed killer known only as Ward. At the head of the train, taped to the wall, was a blurry aerial photograph, a hidden weapons facility in southern Germany, tucked beneath the mountains, disguised as a civilian research lab. It was known as Valkyrie Station, and it was the beating heart of Nazi proximity fuse research. Their job was simple: get in, steal what they could, burn the rest, and make sure no one walked out. But there was nothing simple about it. As the train crossed into enemy-held territory under forged credentials, Tom felt the pressure mounting in his chest. This wasn't like the front lines. There were no trenches to hide in, no tanks to shield them. Here, if something went wrong, no one was coming to help. They arrived just after midnight, a small forest station. Fog blanketed the tracks like spilled smoke. A local contact, an old German rail worker named Jacob, met them in silence, handing off forged ID papers and pointing toward a hidden tunnel beneath the tracks. "Valkyrie is watching everything," Jacob whispered in a hoarse voice. "Even the birds don't fly near it anymore." They followed the tunnel for nearly an hour, crawling through damp stone corridors and silent, dark chambers left over from an older war. Finally, they emerged inside a forgotten coal warehouse just 1 mile from Valkyrie Station. From there, the world changed. Through binoculars, they could see the facility nestled at the foot of the mountain, surrounded by electric fencing, guard towers, and patrol dogs. But it wasn't the security that chilled Tom's blood. It was the convoy of trucks arriving every hour, each carrying crates marked not with swastikas, but with a new emblem, a red lightning bolt splitting a black circle. Eva leaned closer. "That's the symbol of the Schatten Corps," she whispered. "The Shadow Corps, Hitler's private tech division, run by a man named Dr. Helmut Krieger." Tom had heard the name before, whispers mostly. A Nazi scientist who had disappeared from Berlin 2 years earlier, rumored to be behind some of the Reich's darkest experiments. Human testing, forbidden weapons, devices that made even the SS uneasy, and now he was building their version of the fuse. That night, Tom's team breached the outer fence. It was meant to be quiet, quick, in and out before the first guard change, but Valkyrie Station had been expecting them. The moment they stepped into the lower lab through a maintenance shaft, alarms screamed through the concrete like a banshee. Red lights flashed, metal doors slammed shut. And through the glass of the underground lab, Tom saw him for the first time. Dr. Krieger. Tall, thin, dressed in black with gloves and silver-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a funeral director than a scientist. But his eyes, they weren't human anymore. They were cold, machine-like, and they locked directly onto Tom's. Krieger didn't run. He smiled, and then he turned and flipped a switch on the wall. Suddenly, from metal cages in the lab, shapes began to move. Not men, not fully, things wearing uniforms, fused with wires, blinking lights embedded in their skulls, and what looked like prototype proximity triggers mounted on their chests. "Test subjects," Ava gasped. "He's using the fuse. On humans." Before Tom could process it, the glass shattered, and the monsters charged. The team opened fire. But this wasn't a battle. It was a trap. The enemy wasn't trying to build smarter bombs anymore. They were trying to build smarter soldiers. Tom didn't remember firing his rifle. He didn't remember screaming. All he remembered was running. Boots slipping on blood-slick concrete, the walls flashing red, the sound of metal tearing, and something inhuman roaring behind him. The first of the fused soldiers, or whatever Krieger had made them, had taken 3 bullets to the chest and kept moving. Not fast like a beast, not clumsy like the undead, but precise, like a machine. One even detonated when Marco hit it with a grenade. On purpose, its chest rig flashing just before it blew, taking part of the corridor with it. "They're walking fuses," Marco shouted as they sprinted down a side hallway, blood on his face. "Suicide tech! He's putting the fuse inside them!" "No," Ava panted beside him, voice cold, terrified. "He's testing proximity detonation on living tissue. These things aren't soldiers. They're field data. Disposable sensors." They burst through a service door and found themselves in a storage bay, crates stacked high, Nazi documents scattered everywhere. The rest of the team was already inside, holding the door shut, as another of the fused things slammed against it from the other side. Tom, breathing hard, turned to Eva. "Tell me you can read that crap." Eva had already dropped to one knee and ripped open a wooden crate. Inside were rows of metallic shells, just like American proximity shells, but sleeker, with strange blue etchings on the side and a red glow pulsing faintly from their nose. This is beyond copying us," she murmured. "They've improved the range. Maybe doubled it," and she pulled out a small device from a separate box. Flat, round, like a pocket watch, but with antennae. "What is it?" Tom asked. "A trigger controller," Eva said. "They can arm, disarm, and redirect proximity detonation by signal. They don't need timers. They can choose when it goes off." That's when they heard it. A voice on the loudspeakers. Calm. Too calm. "American guests," came the accented German voice. "I do hope the accommodations are to your liking. You've arrived just in time for our demonstration." It was Krieger. Tom grabbed the radio on his belt. "We've been compromised. Valkyrie Station is not a lab. It's a weapons factory. They've put proximity tech in live bodies. Repeat, proximity tech in human hosts. Controlled fuses. We need static." Then, boom! The wall exploded inward. 2 of the fused things charged in. One dragging a broken iron beam, the other with a sparking chest. Ward and the sniper opened fire, bullets tearing into them. But they didn't go down, so Tom did the only thing he could. He grabbed a proximity shell from the open crate, yanked it from its mount, and sprinted toward the enemy. "Tom, no!" Ava shouted, but he didn't stop. As one of the monsters lunged at him, he threw the shell, not at it, but past it, toward a steel pillar near the doorway. The shell beeped once, twice, and then detonated mid-air, right beside the creature's head. The blast blew it sideways, taking the second one with it. The force cracked the pillar, brought half the ceiling down, and knocked Tom flying back into the wall. Darkness swallowed him. He woke up to silence. Smoke, rubble, distant alarms, and Eva pulling him out from under debris, blood on her face and fury in her eyes. "You're insane," she hissed. "But effective," Tom coughed. "That's the American way." The team was down to 4. The sniper was dead. Ward was missing, and Valkyrie Station was starting to self-destruct. Not by accident. Krieger was erasing the evidence. "We need to reach the data vault," Eva said. "If we don't get the blueprints, This was all for nothing. They made their way through collapsing corridors, dodging sparks and flame, past shattered glass chambers filled with half-built prototypes, limbs, wires, children's toys wired with triggers. It was like a graveyard of ideas too evil to live. Finally, they reached a vault door, thick, sealed tight, but with Krieger's voice again on the intercom. "You were too late, Tom. The fuse is already in the field. My prototypes are already en route to Berlin. You've only delayed the inevitable." Ava hacked the panel. Sparks flew. The door creaked open. Inside were documents, blueprints, test videos, radio data, enough to blow the whole project wide open, if they could get out alive. Tom turned to Ava. "We destroy this place. We take the files, and then we hunt every last one of those monsters before they reach the battlefield." She nodded, then paused. "And Krieger?" Tom loaded his last grenade, eyes full of fire. "He's mine." The flames were spreading faster now. The walls of Valkyrie Station groaned like the dying breath of a beast too stubborn to fall. Overhead, steel pipes burst with hissing steam. Alarms screamed. A low rumble vibrated through the floor. Not just from fire. Something deeper. Something moving. Tom didn't wait. He grabbed the files. Blueprints, diagrams, even hand-drawn sketches of proximity detonation implants being surgically embedded into living bodies. The kind of evil that no court would believe unless they saw it themselves. "Rivas, plant the charges," he yelled. "We're not leaving this place standing." Marco, pale and limping from shrapnel in his leg, gave a crooked grin. "I thought you'd never ask." As Rivas moved through the lab, taping C4 to the structural points, Eva stood at the terminal, downloading every bit of data onto a secure drive. And that's when the door to the lower sub-level opened. Tom turned. There, silhouetted in the firelight, stood Dr. Helmut Krieger, untouched by the chaos around him. Dressed in a crisp black uniform, glasses perfectly balanced, a silver pistol in one hand and something else in the other. A proximity detonator, sleek and humming with unnatural energy. "You've already lost," Krieger said calmly, stepping into the room. "Your fuse was the seed. I've only cultivated it." Tom raised his rifle. "You turned it into a nightmare." Krieger didn't flinch. "You call it a nightmare because you don't understand evolution. This is the future of war. No hesitation, no fear. Weapons that choose their moment. Soldiers who don't need orders. Just a signal." He tapped the device in his hand. Tom's skin prickled. From behind Krieger, two more of the fused monsters stepped forward, bigger than the last ones. One was missing a jaw. The other had metal plates bolted into its back. Both had glowing chests, but not red like before. Blue. Eva inhaled sharply. "He's changed the frequency. They won't trigger from proximity anymore." "No," Krieger said. "They only respond to me now." Then he smiled and pressed the switch. The monsters lunged. Tom opened fire, bullets slamming into their chests, but they didn't slow. Marco hit one with a grenade. It staggered, half its head gone, but it kept coming. "Fall back," Ava shouted, pulling Tom by the arm, but Krieger wasn't done. He tossed the detonator aside and pulled another device from his coat. A signal disruptor. The timer on Marco's charges flickered. "Shit!" Marco yelled. He's scrambling the signal. "My detonators are offline!" Krieger laughed, walking forward through the chaos like a conductor leading an orchestra of death. "You wanted to stop my work," he said, "but you've only proven its brilliance." Tom, eyes wild, looked at the crates still stacked behind Krieger. Dozens of prototype shells, enough to supply a battalion. He made a choice, a mad one. "Eva, give me the manual trigger fuse." Eva hesitated. "You'll be caught in the blast." "I won't let these bastards walk out of here." She nodded once and tossed it to him, a silver cylinder the size of a soda can, humming softly. No timer, no delay. Just press and release. Tom turned to Krieger, who was now only 10 feet away, flanked by his monsters. "You ever hear the phrase, poetic justice?" Tom asked. Krieger raised an eyebrow. "Is that American slang for suicide?" Tom pressed the fuse and threw it. Not at Krieger, but at the crate behind him. The monster beside Krieger lunged for it. Too late. It exploded mid-air, sending out a wave of force so violent it caved the ceiling above. Fire swept through the room. Krieger was flung like a rag doll, his body slamming into the wall. One of the fused creatures collapsed in flames. The other tried to run, and Tom emptied the last of his rifle into its back. Smoke, fire, rubble, then silence. Tom coughed, blinking through ash. He saw Krieger's body, broken and twisted, half-pinned beneath a fallen beam. But the scientist was still alive. Barely. "You don't understand," Krieger croaked, blood spilling from his mouth. "It's already in Berlin." Tom stood over him, rifle shaking in his hands. "Then I'll burn Berlin next." But he didn't pull the trigger. He walked away. Eva helped him up, her face streaked with blood and soot. "It's over," she said. "No," Tom replied. "This was just the lab. The real war's ahead." Behind them, Marco finally rewired the last charge. Manually. As they staggered into the tunnel, he triggered it. The last thing they saw as they escaped into the night was Valkyrie Station collapsing into fire, the sky lit with the glow of an evil buried alive. 2 weeks later, the OSS published a silent report, stamped eyes only. Subject: Operation Starfall. Status: Objective complete. Valkyrie Station destroyed threat level. Critical. Confirmed proximity-based detonation tech now exists in enemy hands. Next directive: intercept convoy headed for Berlin. Codename: Operation Hellwire Agent. Assigned: Thomas Miller, clearance. Upgrade: Level Red. Tom didn't smile when he read it. He just grabbed his gear, lit a cigarette, and walked toward the next storm, because war wasn't over. And this time, the enemy's bombs could think.